When people tell you that family is forever, they never tell you how long forever can feel when you're sleeping in the basement of your own house. I remember that first night like a stain that never washed out. The air was damp, the bulb flickered every few seconds, and I could hear their laughter upstairs. My son and his wife, clinking glasses, the sound of music drifting through the vents. My house. It wasn't always like that. I bought this house 23 years ago with my late husband, Harold. We worked every hour God gave us to keep it. I can still see him sanding the porch in the heat, the way he smiled when I painted the front door yellow because I wanted something that felt warm when you came home. Harold's been gone 10 years now, but the smell of his aftershave still lingers in the wood. That's why I never sold it, even when the bills got heavy. This house held my life. When Marcus, my son, asked to move back in just for a while, I said yes before he even finished the sentence. That's what mothers do. He'd just gotten married to Clarissa, a girl I didn't know well but tried my best to like. She was polite back then, soft voice, eyes that never stayed on you too long. I thought she was shy. I was wrong. The first week was fine. We ate together, shared chores. She insisted on cooking, and I let her, thinking maybe it would help her feel at home. But soon she started rearranging things, small at first. My spice rack, the curtains, Harold's chair. Then she asked if we could modernize the living room. That word, modernize, still makes my teeth clench. She took down Harold's photos, said they made the room feel too heavy. I told myself to pick my battles, but when a woman's name is still on the deed, she notices every trespass. It was a rainy evening when Marcus came downstairs, eyes nervous, fingers fidgeting with his wedding ring. He said they needed a bit more space. I remember that phrase exactly, a bit more space. The way he looked at the floor told me it wasn't his idea. Clarissa had decided that the basement would be more comfortable for me. I didn't argue. I just looked at him for a long time, then nodded. He kissed my forehead, thanked me, and went back upstairs. I carried my pillow down that night in silence. People think anger explodes, but real anger, it settles, seeps into you, becomes part of the air you breathe. I didn't cry. I just listened. The laughter, the footsteps, the sound of their life bluing above me. And down there, in the low hum of the water heater, I began to plan. Because what Clarissa didn't know was simple. Every brick of that house, every paper, every bill, it all still belonged to me. Marcus's name wasn't on a single thing. I never thought I'd need that fact for revenge, but life has a strange way of circling back. For weeks, I stayed quiet. I smiled at breakfast, I folded laundry, I thanked her for letting me use her kitchen. I made myself small. And Clarissa, she grew bold. She started calling her friends over, giving them tours, introducing the place as our first home. Once she even told a neighbor that she hoped to inherit it one day. I was standing right there. She laughed after, said she was joking, but her eyes told the truth. The worst was the dinner party. She invited half her office, told everyone I was Marcus's mother who stays with us downstairs. Like I was a tenant. I smiled, kept the wine pouring, made sure everyone had enough to eat. And when one of her friends asked if it was hard sharing space, Clarissa said, "Oh, she's comfortable. She's not used to much anyway." The table went quiet for a heartbeat. Marcus chuckled nervously. I excused myself to check on dessert. That night, I opened the small fireproof box Harold left me. Inside were the papers, the deed, insurance, bank info, all clean and current. I laid them out on the table, smoothed each one flat. My name stared back at me, bold and certain. That was the moment something inside me shifted from hurt to clarity. A week later, Clarissa started talking about renovations. She wanted to knock down walls, redo the kitchen, open up the basement for more light. She said Marcus and I could discuss funding. I let her talk. When you want to ruin a person who thinks they're smarter than you don't argue. You let them dream, you hand them rope yard by yard until they tie their own knot. I started documenting everything. Every message, every receipt she handed Marcus, every expense she claimed I'd agreed to. Quietly, carefully, I made a trail. She noticed me writing things down one morning and asked if I was keeping score. I told her, "Oh, no, dear. I just like to keep records." She laughed, but I saw her pause. That was the first crack. And in that small silence between us, I decided exactly how this would end. She thought I would fade quietly into the walls, that the old woman in the basement would be too tired to fight. But she mistook quiet for weakness. Every morning, I rose before dawn, made her coffee exactly the way she liked it, folded their clothes, kept the rhythm of the house steady. Because predictable routines make people careless. And Clarissa was nothing if not careless when she felt in control. I watched the way she spoke to Marcus, the subtle shifts, the way she slipped ideas into his head like silk threads he thought were his own thoughts. She'd mastered manipulation, but she had no idea she was studying under a better teacher. I didn't raise Marcus to be cruel, but I raised him to trust his mother's silence. That was going to be the key. He still called me every night before bed when Clarissa fell asleep early. Habit, affection, maybe guilt, it didn't matter. I listened, said little, let him talk about her ambitions, her plans, her dreams of turning our family home into something glossy and new. I'd murmur softly, "That sounds lovely, dear," and write down every word. She started pushing him to sell his car to fund her renovation project. She told him it would be an investment in their future. When he hesitated, she turned cold. I heard it in the muffled arguments through the ceiling, the way her tone dropped, the way his words trailed off, small and unsure. She was eroding him, inch by inch. But that kind of erosion leaves residue, dust that always settles somewhere. I became the dust, present, quiet, but inescapable. One evening, she left her tablet on the counter. The screen was still lit. I wasn't looking for anything, but curiosity is a dangerous mercy. I saw the messages. Her best friend, a man named Daniel from work, late-night chats, money talk, house plans, things Marcus had no idea about. She'd already been in contact with a realtor. The house was being appraised. Behind my back. Behind his back. She wanted to sell it and move across the state. My name wasn't even in her vision of the future. I took pictures, saved every chat, every digital whisper. That night, I made Marcus his favorite tea and told him nothing. Not yet. The next day, she held an open house. Imagine that! People walking through my rooms, her voice echoing off walls Harold had painted himself. She called it a preliminary showing. She smiled at me across the living room, the way predators smile before they bite. I smiled back, but my smile was quieter, colder. I'd already called the bank that morning. I'd already moved what little savings I had into a trust. I'd already arranged the call to my lawyer, the same one who helped Harold buy the house. Clarissa's open house never got far. I waited until the guests were sipping their wine, until she was mid-sentence describing future renovations, and I simply said, "Excuse me." Everyone turned. I placed the deed on the table. My name gleamed under the light. I don't believe I ever mentioned, this house isn't for sale. The silence that followed was so deep you could hear the air breathe. One of the guests laughed nervously, thinking it was a joke. Clarissa's smile didn't falter, but her eyes flickered, panic disguised as poise. She tried to recover, saying, "Oh, of course, we're just exploring options." I nodded slowly. Of course. Though it's strange to explore selling something that doesn't belong to you. She froze. Marcus looked between us, confused, his mouth parting like a child caught between parents. I picked up the papers and walked out without another word. Later that night, she came downstairs. Her tone had changed, soft, almost pleading. She said she hadn't meant any harm, that she just wanted a better future for Marcus, that she misunderstood. I listened. I didn't raise my voice. I only said, "When you dig graves, you should measure for your own." Her face shifted. First confusion, then fear. I turned off the lamp and went to bed. That was the last time she spoke to me politely. Over the next weeks, the tension wrapped around the house like fog. She stopped greeting me. Marcus avoided dinner. They whispered more, fought louder. Clarissa drank more wine, slammed more doors. I stayed quiet, always watching. Then one morning, Marcus left early for work. Clarissa stayed home. I found her in the kitchen, staring at the window. She said, "I know what you're doing." I said, "Do you?" She stepped closer, voice trembling under the sharp edge. "You think you can turn him against me, but you won't. He loves me." I smiled just enough to unsettle her. "Then why are you afraid?" She slapped the table, shouted something about leaving, about taking Marcus with her. I didn't flinch. I only said, "You can leave whenever you like, but you'll leave empty-handed." She laughed then, a brittle, breaking laugh. "You old witch! You'll die alone in this basement." I looked at her calmly and said, "Maybe, but at least it will still be mine." She stormed out, her heels hammering the floor like small declarations of war. That was the day she made her biggest mistake. She thought anger would intimidate me. She didn't know that rage has been my oldest friend. When the world has stripped you as everything but breath, rage keeps you steady. I began the final act of my quiet play that evening. I called the lawyer again, updated the will, rewrote the insurance, and secured every document in my name alone. The next morning, I filed a complaint with the Homeowners Association for unauthorized renovation activity, under her name, of course. The week after, I called the building inspector, claiming concerns about structural tampering. Then I let the dominoes fall. Clarissa spent the next month explaining herself to people she thought she could charm. The realtor cut contact. The inspector issued warnings. The bank froze the renovation funds because the paperwork didn't match ownership. Marcus grew tired of her explanations. I could see it, his faith wearing thin. He'd come downstairs sometimes, quiet, sitting across from me without speaking. I'd pour him tea, say nothing, let him find his way through the truth. It's strange watching your child wake from illusion. It's beautiful and cruel at all once. One evening, he finally asked, "Mom, did you know about the house thing?" I nodded. "Then why didn't you tell me sooner?" I looked at him the way only a mother can when she sees her boy bleeding from invisible wounds. I said, "Because, Marcus, you wouldn't have believed me. You needed to hear the lie long enough to taste it." He looked down, eyes wet. "What should I do?" I said, "Nothing. Just listen." The next day, he told Clarissa he wanted a separation. She didn't scream, didn't cry. She just went quiet, the way guilty people do when the mirror finally shows them who they are. That silence echoed through the house like peace returning after a long war. But revenge isn't always about destruction. It's about restoration. I didn't destroy her. I erased her influence. She moved out within the month, left without goodbyes, without one last look. I watched her car drive away through the narrow basement window, her taillights glowing like dying embers. For weeks after, the house felt still. Marcus started repainting the kitchen, fixing things, humming again. Sometimes he'd bring me coffee and sit on the basement stairs. He never apologized, not in words, but his presence said everything. I could have stopped there, but power, once regained, doesn't rest easily. I made sure every trace of her name disappeared from the records. Every document, every shared bill, wiped clean. She vanished from our story like a ghost that never existed. And when the silence settled, I stood in the living room one evening, looking around at the walls Harold built, the home that had survived betrayal, arrogance, and time. I realized revenge hadn't changed me. It had clarified me. I was never the fragile woman they thought I was. I was the architect of my own endurance. I poured myself a glass of wine, looked out the window at the city lights, and whispered, "Forever is only as long as I allow it to be." The house stayed quiet after she left. Quiet in a way that wasn't empty, but alive again. I started hearing things I hadn't noticed in years. The faint creak of the old oak floors, the sigh of the pipes, the whisper of wind under the door. That kind of silence is sacred. It lets you think, lets you breathe again. I'd sit by the window in the mornings, my coffee in hand, and watch the light move across the floorboards, painting the house with gold. It's funny how light changes when the weight of someone else's darkness is gone. Marcus stayed upstairs now. He'd come down sometimes with laundry or dinner, small gestures that meant more than words ever could. We didn't talk about Clarissa. We didn't have to. She became a ghost. Not the kind that haunts, but the kind that fades out of photographs and memories until you're not sure she was ever really there. Weeks turned to months. The seasons shifted. One night, Marcus came down, holding an envelope. He said, "Mom, she sent divorce papers." His voice cracked on the word divorce, but not from pain, from relief. I took the envelope, glanced at the name, and slid it into a drawer without opening it. "Then that's done," I said. He nodded, eyes wet but steady. "I think I'll move out for a bit," he said softly. "Start over." I smiled faintly. That's what this house was built for, starting over. He hugged me then, a long, quiet embrace that carried apology and forgiveness in one motion. When he left the next morning, I watched from the porch. For the first time in years, the air didn't feel heavy. People think revenge ends when the other person leaves. It doesn't. True revenge lives in the peace that follows, the quiet proof that you never needed to shout to win. I started tending to the garden again. The same roses Harold planted 30 years ago still bloom stubbornly along the fence. I cut them carefully, arranged them in vases around the house. Red for strength, white for peace. I liked the balance of that. Every so often, Clarissa would try to call Marcus. He never answered. Once she even came back, stood at the gate one evening, her hair tied back, eyes hidden behind sunglasses. I watched her from the porch, silent. She hesitated, then said, "I came to get a few things." I said, "There's nothing of yours here anymore." Her lips tightened. She looked past me at the door, at the home that used to echo with her voice, and I saw the realization hit her. She was outside now, permanently. She left without another word. That night, I sat on the porch long after dark, listening to the crickets. Revenge isn't fire. It's frost. It doesn't burn. It preserves. It keeps the truth intact, frozen and unbreakable, so that when time passes and lies melt away, your version of the story is the only one left standing. That's how I survived Clarissa. That's how I survived everything. The next few years were quiet. I learned to love silence again. I painted the walls, refinished the floors, changed the curtains. The basement, my prison once, became my sanctuary. I filled it with books, plants, and light. The same walls that once closed in on me now held my peace. Every night I'd light a candle and read a few pages before bed, the faint scent of wax and dust mixing in the air. That's what freedom smells like. Not perfume or money, but space that belongs entirely to you. Sometimes people ask me if I regret anything. I tell them no. Regret is for people who didn't finish what they started. I finished. Completely. But if I'm honest,
Revenge didn't just change how I saw Clarissa. It changed how I saw myself. I used to think survival meant keeping your head down, staying quiet, not making waves. But no. Survival is strategy. It's knowing when to wait, when to move, when to let people believe they've won so you can build your next step beneath their feet. One spring morning, Marcus called. His voice was brighter now, lighter. "Mom," he said, "I met someone." I smiled, though he couldn't see it. "That's wonderful, dear. Tell me about her." He laughed softly. "You'll like her. She's kind. Really kind." I nodded. "Then bring her for dinner." When they came that weekend, I saw it. The peace in his face, the softness in his eyes. The new woman, Elise, greeted me with warmth, carrying a pie she'd baked herself. No pretense, no sharpness, just sincerity. I liked her immediately. For the first time in years, laughter returned to the house, gentle, unforced. Later that night when they'd gone, I stood in the kitchen looking at the empty plates, the flickering candle on the table. The house felt alive again, but in that warmth, I also felt something else. An ache, quiet and deep. Not sadness, not guilt, just awareness. Power always comes with a price. I had mine. Peace, yes, but a kind of solitude that never truly leaves. Once you've fought that kind of war, you never go back to who you were before it began. Months passed. Marcus married Elise. They moved nearby. I visited sometimes, always welcome, always loved. Life settled into something soft and slow. And yet, every time I passed by the basement door, I remembered the cold floor, the sound of footsteps above, the feeling of being unseen. I never hated that memory. I kept it like a stone in my pocket, a reminder of what silence can become when you fill it with purpose. One evening, I got a letter in the mail. No return address. I opened it slowly. Inside was a single sheet of paper, handwritten. It said, "You won. I hope it was worth it." No name, but I knew the handwriting. Clarissa. I stared at it for a long while, then folded it neatly, placed it in the fireplace, and watched it burn to ash. When the flame died, I whispered, "It was." The years rolled on. People came and went. Neighbors changed. The garden grew wilder but more beautiful with each season. I grew older, slower, but sharper in ways that time couldn't dull. Power doesn't fade with age. It condenses. It becomes wisdom. It becomes presence. People started calling me Miss May in the neighborhood, the quiet lady in the big old house with the roses. They didn't know the stories those walls held, the ghosts they'd swallowed, the woman they had shaped. Sometimes, at dusk, I sit on the porch with a cup of tea, watching the sun slip behind the trees. The air turns gold, and for a moment, everything feels perfectly still. That's when I think of Harold, of Marcus, of the woman I used to be. Soft, forgiving, endless patient. And I smile, because patience didn't make me weak. It made me lethal.
If anyone asked me now what revenge feels like, I'd say this. It feels like peace that no one can take from you. It feels like knowing the story ended the way you wrote it, not the way they planned. It feels like sitting in your own house, in your own chair, breathing air that no one else claimed. I still sleep in the basement sometimes, out of choice, because that's where I found my strength. Every time I turn off the lamp, the room glows faintly from the city lights outside, soft and silver. I close my eyes and think, she made me sleep here to make me small. But she didn't know. The basement was the foundation. You can't break a woman who sleeps where the house begins. And when I drift into dreams, I hear Harold's voice, low and proud, saying, "You kept it standing." And I whisper back, "Always." Because in the end, revenge wasn't about payback. It was about remembering who I was and never letting anyone bury that again.